So I'm going to talk about the project that Wade already mentioned he's involved in, as is Margaret. It's a large research project. It's 2.5 years. It's funded by the MRC and an organisation called the Europol Group. And we're very lucky to have a lot of partners on the team. There's about 10 members of staff from Sheffield University, a couple of members of staff from the University of Kent, somebody from the Office of Health Economics in London, and we are sort of key partners with NICE. So we have some research collaborators from NICE, plus we have about 16 staff from NICE who are sort of giving us input throughout the process. So we're in a great position, hopefully, to deliver on this project. So the aim is to try and develop a new measure that captures changes in quality of life across both health and social care. And it's quite a difficult challenge. So I think we've already kind of looked at some of the kind of background circumstances to why we wanted to do this project. As a health economist, we spend a lot of our time doing cost effectiveness modelling, where we're looking at the cost side of an intervention and we're trying to capture the benefit side of it as well. And because we want to make comparisons between an intervention, let's say, that improves somebody's quality of life in arthritis and an intervention in sort of some kind of more acute care, we need to be able to capture benefit using the same measuring tool. And at the moment, the recommendation from NICE is that we use a measure called the EQ5D. Now that's a very simple measure that's just designed to capture those aspects of health that are kind of comparable across many, many different conditions. The problem is with it is that it's very health focused. And so there are some really important benefits in a lot of healthcare that it might be missing out on. So that's particularly in terms of the impact on carers. But it's also in terms of the sort of softer aspects of improvements in quality of life, particularly around aspects to do with people's emotional health and their general well-being. So we're trying to address that gap, and we've already sort of seen how the prevalence of long-term conditions and the ageing population makes this even more important, and particularly if we try and integrate health and social care. If we just use our standard health measures, we're going to miss out on a lot of the benefits that arise from social care interventions. So one way the health economists have tried to deal with this at the moment is by saying, well, let's have an outcome measure that we can use in health, so our EQ5D, and let's make some different ones that maybe we could use in public health or in social care. So we've created lots of different instruments. The problem with that is it's very difficult to make comparisons, which is what we want to do if we want to know how to spend our limited pot of money in the best possible way. But it's also quite difficult if we have a measure, this is an Ascot measure, which some people may be familiar with, it's used in social care. It doesn't really capture health change very well. And yet, it may well be that an intervention is trying to do, improve general well-being, quality of life, and health. And we don't want to choose between a kind of quality of life measure and a health measure, because we'll miss out on some of the benefit. So having these different instruments doesn't seem very satisfactory. But none of them capture all the benefits that we want to, which is why we felt it was really important to try and develop a new instrument. But in all honesty, much as we've said to the MRC we're definitely going to do this, we're not absolutely sure that it's going to work. Because we're asking an awful lot of a new instrument to be able to adequately capture all the benefits that matter to social care users, to carers, and to patients across a wide range of conditions. So, if we do it, this is what we'll do. Develop a new classification system, a new way of describing the outcomes in health and social care that's broad capture most of the benefits. We know we won't capture everything because some things are very specific to particular conditions, but we want to capture the majority of the benefits. But it's also got to be very fit for purpose. So we have to be able to use it in our economic models. Now that means we have to use it to measure quality adjusted life years, because that's the metric that we as health economists use. And our quality adjusted life year is just a way of saying, well, let's put everything onto the same scale, so that a 1 would be 1 year spent in good quality of life, and 0 would be a state that we thought was equivalent to being dead. And we can try and describe any quality of life state like that. Now, we've been using the quality adjusted life year very successfully for maybe the last 30 years. But the problem is the quality bit in our quality adjusted life year has been very much about health rather than about actual full quality of life. So really what we've had is a sort of health-related quality adjusted life year. And what we're trying to do is push that boundary so that we cover more of what matters to people's lives. So the project is called Extending the Quality. So we're extending it away from just being about health into full quality of life. And we've just shortened it to eQuality. And we're trying to kind of marry 3 different things. One is that we want to capture what matters to the service users in terms of what matters to their life. But we also want to make sure that it's fit for purpose for the decision makers, whether that's NICE or NHS England or local commissioners. Plus, it has to meet the needs of the health economists, so we have to still be able to put it onto our quality scale. So they're the sort of 3 things that we're trying to do simultaneously with the new measure. This just gives you a sort of a rundown of the project and where we are now. So the first part of the project was to try and identify what should we include in a measure that's trying to capture quality of life. And we call those the sort of themes or the domains of the instrument. And now we based that mostly on a very extensive review of the qualitative literature where researchers have actually spoken to patients, to carers, to social care users and asked them how their health condition or their social care need or intervention or their caring role impacts on their life. We've also supplemented that with a bit of data analysis on some existing data where we had lots of questions about quality of life that had been asked of a very large international sample. So we're kind of coming to the end of stage 1. And in stage 2, we then say, well, if we got the domains, the themes that we're interested in, how are we going to find really good questions that work well for all these groups to be able to measure quality of life? Once we've done that, we do a lot of testing as to whether the questions work with all our different groups, and eventually we will hopefully be able to get a short instrument that we can then put through to develop a scoring system in our evaluation stage that will allow us to take that instrument and turn it into our quality adjusted life years. So just a little bit about the literature review. What we wanted, like I said, was the voice of the user. So the voice of the carers, the voice of the patients, both physical and mental health patients. Obviously, we couldn't cover all the literature, so we've had to be quite selective and just focus on about 18 different conditions that are all very different, to try and get a sense of what does the literature say about what matters to people. And like I say, it's not a full systematic review, but we've tried to be as transparent as we can about what we've done and where we've got this information from. So we've used a number of different arms to the review. One thing we did was look really carefully at how other people had developed instruments in the past. What evidence did they use? And actually, a lot of the time it wasn't as good an evidence base as we would hope. So the current measure used by NICE, the EQ5D, although it has a lot of very useful aspects aspects to it actually was designed by a group of researchers and clinicians just sitting around in a room and choosing a few things to go into it. So it didn't have any kind of voice of the service user in its development. So once we'd done the review, and there was a team of about 5 researchers working on the review, we then tried to say, well, how can we kind of bring all this together, because actually there's a lot of diverse information here. So we tried to develop some kind of conceptual framework to help us kind of combine all this information. And we sort of started that process by looking at what kind of frameworks exist already, particularly around health and quality of life, and we adapted one that's probably the most well used, which was by Wilson and Cleary. So if you want to go on to the next. This is our kind of starting point of how we're going to think about what matters to quality of life and how all these things interact with each other. So we sort of started with, well, people have kind of health conditions or caring responsibilities or certain needs that play out in terms of having impacts on their lives. And we started thinking about the different ways in which these conditions play out into people's lives. Framing it within the context that we need, which is ultimately, like I said, we need that scoring system to be based on our sort of quality scale. So we've sort of tried to think about what's going to impact on our ultimate instrument. Well, we know it's going to be self-report. We know we're going to have to kind of score it through some sort of preferences from the public, and we know it's going to be influenced by people's individual environment and circumstances. So this wasn't fixed in stone. This is just a starting point to help us think about all the information that we've found in our review. And this has had to be slightly adapted because there were some things that came up that we hadn't anticipated. So it's very much a work in progress. At the end, hopefully, we will have a clearer model. But this is just a sort of a stepping stone into thinking about what that framework looks like. Okay, so we want to think about what's going to go into our measure. What are the themes that we need in our instrument? And we had to kind of make some really difficult decisions because we know the instrument has to be short. It's no good us saying, here's a measure of quality of life. It's going to take half an hour to fill in because nobody will use it. Okay, so it has to be short, which means all of the detail can't necessarily be there. So we're making some difficult choices about, in a sense, what do we not measure? And one thing we might not be able to measure is stuff that's just not relevant to everyone. And this is really difficult in some areas. Work being the most difficult and the most challenging, because people's ability to work, if they're working age and they want to work, is a real loss to their quality of life. But of course, not everybody is of working age and not everybody wants to work. So we already have a difficulty in how we address this and whether we have questions asking about those kind of things. Another sort of difficult areas is things like sexual functioning. It isn't important to everybody, but it's very important to some people. So what we've had to do is say, well, actually, we're just going to have to focus on those things that matter to everyone and accept that there will be some things that we're not capturing. So what we're trying to say is we've got to have something that's relevant to everyone. People have got to be happy to answer it. If we don't think they're going to be happy to answer it or answer it truthfully, it's not going to be very useful to us. We're going to have to make difficult choices. So if something really heavily overlaps with another domain, maybe we don't need to measure both. And then we want to get rid of something that isn't of intrinsic value to people. So if we think something's important, but actually it leads on to another outcome that we're already measuring, then maybe we don't need to measure it. So if something, it isn't that we care about it for its own sake, we care about it because it lets us do something else. So self-management might be an interesting one, and provision of information. Do we care about that just because it's better to be well-informed? Or do we care about that because we think if we're well-informed, people's other outcomes will be better? So we're using our sort of deductive reasoning really to say, well, does it matter just because it's important? So we might think pain just matters because it's really not nice to be in pain. And we don't need to think about it beyond that. It's just not nice to be in a state of pain. Okay? But there might be other things where we say, well, actually, if I'm well informed, I can do better things, have other better outcomes. So we've had to make some difficult decisions about the kind of the order of causality of things. So this is what we've ended up with. It's still not absolutely fixed in stone, but this is what the literature review said, and after fairly extensive consultation, this is what we're initially going with in terms of what the instrument is going to cover. And hopefully, this isn't a surprise. Hopefully you look at this list and go, yeah, these are the things that actually seem to matter to service users in terms of, and ourselves, in terms of quality of life. So a lot of our health measures, sort of mobility, self-care, comes in under what we're able to do.